Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do a weekend review show. We're going to talk about the top 10 from this weekend's box office, the weekend of January 27th through the 29th. And we will see how I did on my projections from last week on the three new wide release openers. So let's get the ball rolling here. Number one this weekend, according to the estimates, will be Split with $26.3 million. Its drop was only 34%, which is fantastic for a horror film. It's still on about 3,200 theaters. Its per theater average this weekend was $8,200. Now, the actual stated budget for this movie was only $9 million. Now, again, that's production budget. That's before marketing is taken into account. Marketing for Split, I would imagine, would probably be in the $30 to $40 million range just for the domestic market alone of America and Canada. So you're talking, I don't know what I want to say total costs are, but probably in the 50 to 60 range million. This will definitely make a nice chunk of change. And I think the biggest surprise about Split is this drop, right? I don't think no one's surprised that it's a number one again. I think people are saying, oh, maybe it'll hit 20 million again and just beat out A Dog's Purpose. But this drop is abnormally low, and it is especially abnormal for a horror film like this. Now, I guess it's a horror film. It's kind of a thriller. I went to go see it on Saturday. Now, I talked a lot about M. Night Shyamalan last week. We kind of did a little rundown of his career. And I talked about how, Sixth Sense through The Village, and maybe a little bit of Lady in the Water, but mostly The Village, I consider to be masterpieces of horror, thrillers. There is a reason why he was called the next Alfred Hitchcock. And now, of course, that was hyperbole to some degree, but there was so much richness and unique style in those early films that M. Night Shyamalan was clearly one of the greatest filmmakers working at the time in America. And then he went off a cliff. And now he is back. The Visit got a decent reception. It wasn't, and not everybody was over the moon about The Visit. I didn't see it all the way through. I've seen parts of it. It seems kind of interesting. I may one day sit down and watch the whole thing instead of catching it on pay cable about every week, about 10 minutes once a week. But Split is interesting for me personally, not to get too much into art criticism. I thought it was an absolute disaster of a film. I fell asleep multiple times. I didn't understand what the hook was to the entire thing. The twist was kind of tepid. It was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to end the film, and it's an interesting way to tie it into another film. But I just didn't feel like it was explosive, and I'm really fascinated by the audience reaction to this. People seem to love this film. Obviously, if it's only dropping 30% in its second weekend and it's a horror film, something special is happening, and it still has that per theater average of $8,000. People are still coming to this movie in droves because of word of mouth. When you see numbers like that on a second weekend, that is almost exclusively people telling other people either on social media or in person, wherever, that they should go see this film, and people are responding to that well. So Split's doing great. M. Night Shyamalan is kind of back in the driver's seat, back in the saddle to some degree. I wonder if, I don't want to give away the twist at the end, I wonder if they will do a second film related to Split in the near future. My guess is that they will, based on this response. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out over the next few weeks. I don't think this 34% drop is going to stick. Maybe it will. Maybe it has really connected with audiences, and I think especially younger audiences under 30. I love how under 30 is young to me now, when 5 years ago under 20 was. In any event, I think it's connected with that group of people, the under 30 millennials and Generation Z, whatever you want to call them. They really like this film, and they're really on board with it. I want to check out the Rotten Tomato score right now is 74%, so critics were into it as well. The audience score on Rotten Tomato was 83%, which is good. It definitely means that audiences were into it. B+ on Cinema Score. That indicates to me that most of the people seeing this movie really enjoyed it and liked it. Now, it's surprising it wasn't an A based on what I'm seeing on the numbers, but cinema score can be a little bit skewed sometimes. In any event, split number one with 26.3 million. Great drop. I'm excited to see what it does. M. Night Shyamalan is back. Despite the fact that I hated the film. Anyway, and number two, A Dog's Purpose. So we talked about this one at length last week because it is a new wide release opener. It is coming in at $18.4 million with a per theater average of $6,000, which is pretty good. Now, the budget on this was super low, $22 million for production. You know, the marketing stuff, probably want to account for another $30 million, $40 million for that. I'm not sure how this one's going to play out long term, but I do know this. The tracking on this film within the industry for its opening weekend was in the mid-20s about a few months ago or a month ago. This was all before the PETA disaster. A cell phone video leaked of a dog being quote-unquote mistreated on set. Now, I'm not going to get into the allegations or how they played out, but it essentially turned into this huge public spat that TMZ was, of course, fueling the fire because it gets them more clicks, and that's how they sell their advertising. That's how they make their money, is by getting people outraged. So that was a back and forth that was going on for a long time. I think PETA picketed the film or some bullshit like that. I got nothing against PETA, but sometimes they pick weird battles to fight. And this was certainly one of their odder battles. But in any event, we don't know if it really depressed the numbers that much. Like I said, it was tracking in the mid-20s, and it only came in at 18.4. Now, I sort of read the tea leaves on this and said, okay, like it's not going to do 20. It's like I thought it was going to do. I said it was going to do $19.9 million with a $6,500 per theater average. I was only not that far off. I think I did pretty decent on this one. The per theater average was $6,000, so it was off $500 on that per theater average, and that translated to me being off about $1.5 million on the total. So not a bad guess for me. I do think a lot of this controversy hurt the film in terms of it making an extra $5 to $6 million this opening weekend. It didn't necessarily prevent it from becoming a $30-40 million film. I don't think that was going to happen, but I think the numbers were depressed to some degree. The audience reaction to it was pretty good. It ended up with an A cinema score, which means basically everybody that went to see it really, really liked it, loved it almost. Not an A+, but darn close. On Rotten Tomatoes, the audience reaction was 71% liked it. And that's really fascinating when you look at this, because the Rotten Tomato score is at 71% for A Dog's Purpose, and its cinema score was at A. But Split had a lower cinema score, but a 10% higher score on Rotten Tomatoes. So there's a lot of discrepancy between these numbers. My guess is that people who are responding on Rotten Tomatoes, it's not like a survey in person like Cinema Score is. My guess is a lot of the protesters who don't want this film to do well are responding and bringing that number down a bit. But I think overall, you can expect A Dog's Purpose to have decent legs. Usually a film like this is going to be well over 3x its opening weekend when it finally finishes out its domestic run. I think for A Dog's Purpose, it'll probably be in the high 3 range. Other dog films have been in the low 4 range, 4.3x their opening weekend. I don't think Dog's Purpose is going to do that well, but I do think it's going to have one of those family film legs where it's just in the high 3s. So it will make a fair amount of money, but not at all what it could have made without this protest and the way they handled that dog on set. And the way they handled the PR afterwards. It was just kind of a disaster all around for the film. In any event, so Dog's Purpose came in at number 2 this weekend with 18.4 million. Coming in at number 3 was Hidden Figures. This is the big story, the big surprise of this winter season. It doesn't feel like winter here in Tennessee, I'll tell you that much. It's about 70 degrees the other day. Its weekend gross for Hidden Figures was $14 million. That is an 11% drop. It lost a few theaters, 65 theaters this weekend. Its per theater average in its 6th weekend is over $4,000, just about $4,200 per theater. There's not much more you can say about this film, despite the fact that this is going to be the story of the first part of the year. Like, there's no way you can look at it any other way. This is the story. This film came out of nowhere and was given life through one of the best marketing campaigns I've ever seen for a smaller film like this. This is not a blockbuster. It's not a blockbuster at all. Its production budget was only $25 million, the same as A Dog's Purpose, or right around that amount. It's going to end up well over $100 million. It's already at $104 million. Who knows when this thing is going to stop bringing in people? If you're dropping only 11% in the 6th weekend, something special is happening here, and there's not enough I can say about it. I mean, it's one of those films that may end up with a 5x, 6x return on its initial wide release. It's one of those. It reminds me a lot of films from the 90s, where back then, for you younger folks, if a film was really good and connected with audiences, this would happen all of the time, where the legs would just keep going and going and going. And if a normal film does, 2.8x its opening weekend, those films would do 3, 4, 5x. They'd make so much money on the back end there. And I think Hidden Figures really reminds me of those types of films. The film that comes to mind is Forrest Gump, and I gotta look up and see what its multiplier was, because it seems like one of those films where people may have been unsure about it when it was coming out, but once people saw it and word of mouth got out, there was no stopping it, essentially. So Forrest Gump, let's see, it opened at $24 million. This is back in 1994. Again, that's totally different money now because of inflation. It opened at $24 million, right? Which is not an outrageously good opening. It's pretty decent for a film. But it ended up with $330 million. So if you look at the multiplier there, it had a 13.7, 13.8 multiplier. That has to be one of the best multipliers in the history of Hollywood and wide releases like this. I don't think Hidden Figures is going to have that high of one, but I think, the 4 range is a given. 5x is even possible too. So great performance for Hidden Figures with that 11% drop this weekend at $14 million. Number 4 this weekend was Resident Evil, The Final Chapter, $13.9 million. Its per theater average was about 4,460. I was really close on this one, on that per theater average. I said a $5,000 per theater average. So my guess was that it would make $15.5 million. But it ended up only at 13.8. So I was about $1.1 million off on this one. Pretty good this week. Pretty good projections. Not much to say about this one. This is probably going to be the final Resident Evil movie of this series. I imagine with the new game coming out that has a more naturalistic, almost sort of earthy feel to it, like an old school horror movie. My guess is there will be a reboot of this series that kind of abandons the more like technological Umbrella Corporation stuff and kind of gets a little bit more gritty, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the new video game is, which is amazing, by the way. The VR experience of the new Resident Evil is fantastic. Any event, Resident Evil underperformed here, I think, in general. The other Resident Evil films usually opened in the low 20 millions, ended up at about 50 million, $60 million total. This one's just not going to get there. So I think Sony will be happy to put this one to bed for a while. Again, people make the argument, the Resident Evil films, that it's going to do very well overseas, and that may be true. But if you're looking at the context here of the domestic market, this is not good for Resident Evil, The Final Chapter. I think Sony wanted to get a lot more out of this final installment of this series. Coming at number 5 this weekend was La La Land with $12 million. A nice big 43% jump. Why is that? Well, La La Land took home 14 Academy Award nominations last week. When the nominations released on Tuesday, Lionsgate made the smart move and said, hey, we're only on 1,800 screens. Let's up it a lot. So they added about 1,200, almost 1,300 screens for La La Land. And its per theater average did pretty well. Like, it didn't drop that much. Its per theater average is about $3,800. I think last weekend it was in the 4,000s, maybe 4,700 if I remember correctly. So La La Land doing great. It's at 106 million so far. I keep on comparing La La Land to Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures is going to win that battle. There's no doubt that it's going to really, really take off and just stick around for a very long time. While La La Land, I think, will do good business for the next couple of weeks. If it wins Best Picture, I don't even know when the Oscars are. I think they're in like 3 weeks or something. Maybe it keeps sticking around for a while. I don't know. We'll see. It's on, 3,100 screens right now, or theaters. So it can still rake in a lot of cash if it can keep that per theater average up. For some reason, I got some doubt here. My gut says probably not going to happen, and it'll start tapering off pretty quickly. Even if it does win Best Picture, I don't think it's going to give Hidden Figures a run for its money. So La La Land number 4 with 12 million. Number 6 was Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage, $8.2 million. A very bad 60% or 59% drop. You would have hoped they would keep it in the 50%, lower 50 range, but it did not. Only on second weekend, its per theater average is already down to about $2,300 per theater. This is a huge, huge bust for Vin Diesel. And 15 years too late, I think. 15 years after the original, and this is what you can do? Not good. Kind of matches the whole too late sequel thing that's been happening, especially with like Zoolander 2 this year. Just did not go over well. I guess if people just either forgot about Triple X or just weren't interested in seeing another one. I feel like the timing for this sequel would have been maybe 3 to 4 years after the original, and then you see how it does. I don't know why you would greenlight $85 million for a production budget of a sequel 15 years afterwards. And then you got to think about marketing for it. 40 million just in the US, maybe, at least 40, maybe 50 million. That's a lot of money they're going to lose on this, unfortunately. So Triple X came in at number 6 with 8.3 million. Sing is still sticking around in number 7 slot, $6.2 million for the weekend, a nice 30% drop. That's even with it losing about 500 theaters. Its per theater average is $2,300. Compare that to Triple X, where they had the same per theater average, but Sing's been out for 4 more weekends. Not much to say about Sing. Performing very well overall. $257 million. I mentioned it beat out Moana. Moana's at $240 now. It's going to crush Moana at the end of the day, which I just think is sad because, look, I haven't seen Sing. I know it's not a great film. I can just tell by the trailer and the way it's produced. I guarantee you Moana is a better children's film, but it did not make more money. I think it was just Universal's marketing arm just did a better job at selling Sing. And number 8 this weekend, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, still hanging in there. $5.1 million for the weekend. Great 28% drop. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. It dropped 28% and lost 554 theaters at the same time. Like, that is great. Its per theater average is $2,500. It has made $520 million so far in its run. I don't know how long it's going to stick around for. I mean, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It did lose 550 theaters. So I think the distributors are sort of like, and the theater chains are like, all right, it's time to move on. It's been out for 7 weeks. But I can see it playing decently well through Valentine's Day. I think that Valentine's Day weekend, whatever is it, the 10th? I have to look it up. That's where everything's going to start really switching over. Because you got a couple of big openers coming out that weekend, and I think that's when Rogue One will start making its exit. And number 9 was Monster Trucks. Somehow managed $4.1 million this weekend. I don't know how. It's losing theaters left and right. Lost about 600 theaters. Its per theater average is only $1,600. Its total domestic run so far for Monster Trucks is $28 million. This is an epic failure on so many different levels. They won't even list their production budget because it's so embarrassing to Paramount. I can't remember what the story was. I think some executive's kid came up with the idea and he just greenlit it because he's a narcissistic asshole or something. But it's going to cost Paramount probably at least $100 million in losses. Think of how many jobs that would be. I mean, that's why I love talking about this stuff, because the amount of money involved is outrageous. And the money is linked to, or the money is made or lost based on a product that is so incredibly subjective. You are selling art at the end of the day. And whether something does incredibly well, like Hidden Figures, it's going to make, $150 million on a $25 million production budget. The difference between that and Monster Trucks, which is going to be like $100 million loss, the big movies, the big blockbusters that do well, they profit $250 million, $300 million, some even near $400 million in pure profit. And so when you win big, but when you lose, you can lose massively, like Monster Trucks. And that's why I'm so fascinated with this business, because it all rests on selling and creating a piece of art at the end of the day. And what other realm is art this powerful, monetarily or financially? In our world, wherever you live, money does tend to rule most things. And it's fascinating to me that art and commerce mix in the way it does with films. And that's why I think been obsessed with box office and movie business for the last 20 years or so. Anyways, that's my little philosophical rant about why the box office is so fascinating. Monster Trucks is a huge dud and it sucks. Number 10 is Gold, which I did a projection on last week. It came in at $3.5 million. Its per theater average was $1,600. I was pretty close. I said the per theater average was going to be $1,500, and I said it would make $3.2 million. Only off about $300,000 or even a little bit less than that. So it's pretty much on the money on that one. This is a bad opening for Matthew McConaughey and the Weinstein Company. His other sort of Saw movie he did with STX over last summer, Free State of Jones, it opened at $7.5 million, not even half of this. And the other movies that I sort of compared it to, there was no audience for this. And I just don't understand why they released it now. I guess they wanted to dump it for whatever reason. I just don't get the logic. Like, maybe they're going to make something back on it. They did make $3.5 million on it, but they don't get all of that. Obviously, they get about half of that. The studio does in the United States and the domestic market or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know. I think at this point, they're just trying to recoup as much money as possible to limit their losses. Because in my mind, Gold seems like one of those movies that you would push out on VOD or push out on Netflix or Amazon and just forget about the theatrical release, just because it doesn't feel like a big enough movie to play in the theaters. But it didn't seem arty enough to win like the Moonlight slot and a lot of the art house theaters. So it was kind of no man's land, which is like Free State of Jones is the same thing. Wasn't big enough to be a big blockbuster or even a mid-size film in the theater space. But it wasn't really artistic enough or experimental enough to really get the audiences in San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles, that art house crowd. So big failure for Gold. They didn't spend a ton of money making it, so they're not going to lose a lot. But I think more than anything, it's a failure for Matthew McConaughey here. This is another one of his movies that has just not landed post his True Detective renaissance. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with him. And hopefully he connects or lines himself up with a good project here in the next couple of years, because he has been pretty much striking out the last couple of years with his film choices. That's the top 10. Gold sort of rounds out the top 10. Number 11 was Patriots Day, which I also saw last week and I thought was not very good. That did about $2.85 million, 50% drop. That's a big bust, I think, for those guys. Another bust for Peter Berg and Mark Wahlberg. They're sort of partnered up on Deepwater as well, and that busted pretty bad, actually. That was a bigger flop because they just spent a ton of money on it. This one's kind of a smaller flop. Outside of that, the other sort of notable films, Lion is doing pretty well. The Weinstein Company is keeping it at that limited, about 500, 600 theaters. So they're not really trying to push it out too much, which I think is respectable. They're not like, I think that's more respectable to keep Lion at that range and know what it can do. Keep it within expectations, right? Gold they just threw out to 2,000 screens, and it was just like, ran into a brick wall. Lion is just they're keeping it small, keeping it in the right theaters in the right cities, and it's going to play pretty well. Besides that, that's mostly everything out of the top 10. The only other thing I'll mention this weekend is The Salesman premiered. This is an Iranian film. The reason I want to bring it up is that the director was nominated for an Oscar, but due to Trump's insane new executive order preventing anybody essentially from coming from 7 different countries in North Africa and the Middle East, the director of this film won't be able to come to the Academy Awards, where he's nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, which is absolutely outrageous. And the reason that it hit my radar this weekend is it has the best per theater average at about $23,000 per theater, which is not, let's be honest, it's only three theaters. Not amazing for a limited release film, but I think notable that I think people are going to come out and support this film because of the director situation, and in a response to and protest of the Trump administration's kind of, crazy executive order blocking all of these people from coming to the United States, even if they are a legal resident. I don't want to get too political, but anyways, I just wanted to note that one. I will be back later in the week to talk about the new releases coming up for February 3rd. We have 2 big wide releases coming out. We have Rings, which was originally supposed to come out, I want to say last Halloween. It had like that money slot right before Halloween, and for some reason they pulled the plug on it and moved it out to February. The trailers look terrible. I don't think it's going to do very well. Split has soaked up all of the air in the sort of horror genre, I think, for the next few weeks. So people got their horror fix with Split. I don't think they're going to go see Rings. Who would? It looks awful. What was the last Ring movie? I don't remember. But the only good one's really the first one. The other big wide opener next weekend is going to be The Space Between Us. I'm very fascinated by this film. I have no idea why. The trailer's been playing like nonstop for the last few months. It's got Britt Robertson in it, who is this woman in her 20s, who I think she's like 25. I have to look up, but she always ends up playing like these weird teenager roles. You might have remembered her from that weird Nicholas Sparks movie, The Longest Ride, I think it was. And she played someone in college, but she's like 26 years old, and they keep putting her in like these weird, the really weird role for her was Tomorrowland, where if you saw the trailer, it's like, oh, that girl's like obviously like 15 or 16 years old. But she's like 26, 25 years old. Like, why are they? I don't know. I just found it so weird. And so she's playing, I think, another teenage aged person in this movie. It's about a kid who's the first kid who grows up on Mars, I think, and like falls in love with her, of course, and wants to come to Earth. And then there's like medical complications, and he's like dying when he comes to Earth. It's one of those kind of ridiculous Romeo and Juliet romances where someone's probably going to die at the end. Or both people, spoiler alert, Romeo and Juliet. That's it. That's all I got. I'll be back a little bit later this week with the projections for those films. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast.